Hey, this is Body Mechanics 1, walk, jump, and cycle. Alright, so in this class we'll be animating a walk cycle with the lower body of our mannequin and a jump cycle. Now we have legs to deal with, so we will see the importance of a new animation principle, silhouettes. We'll work on jumping first. It's very similar to the ball bouncing on the spot, but we have to take into account timing as always. Stretch and squash, anticipation, and slow ins and slow outs, or easing. There's some really great reference books that every animator should have. We talked about one already, The Illusion of Life, written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson. Basically, they share all of their experiences that they went through while working in the early Disney animation studio. I believe the animation principles, the original animation principles, were published for the first time in this book. So this is a great book for every animator to read. This is a book that I grew up with. I showed you this one, I think, already too. Preston Blair's cartoon animation. Really good stuff in there. Some of the references I use in this class are from that book. And then the last one I want to show you is the Animator Survival Guide. This is also a really great book to get your hands on, written by Richard Williams. A lot of animators I know just have this book. That's all they need. These three books are highly recommended for you to go through, leaf through, go to the animation principles section and just pour over it. You know, so a lot of them have, especially these two, the cartoon animation and the survival kit. There's a lot of design stuff in there too, but for this class, really focus on the animation stuff. Alright, so let's take a look at the lower body of our mannequin. We'll just take a look at what the controls do and we'll get right to work on our jump. Alright, so this is the root control. When you have this selected, you can rotate and translate it. And that just takes the entire, when the upper body is attached, it takes the entire upper body, but the legs go along for the ride. This is a hip control. You can't move it, but you can just rotate this. So that's nice, gives you some nice stuff. Okay, and then we have our foot controls here. We can translate these and we can rotate these in any way. And there's also a knee control for each foot, for each leg. That'll just help us to point the knee in the right direction. So if we take a closer look at the foot control, you'll notice in the channel box we have three extra controls. The first one is a roll, which does this if you virtual slide it. That's going to come in really handy for our walk cycles and run cycles and a lot of other movements. We have a toe bend, which just flaps the toe around. And then we have a toe roll, which just brings the entire foot up, pivoting from the toe. So we have our mannequin position control. So that just gives us our basic position of the entire mannequin. And then there's this move control on the inside of that. It does the same thing. It moves the entire mannequin. If you want to move him off the position control. Now the reason why there's two of these is, say for example he's walking along and he does a little skip in the air, or he jumps over a wall, or does a flip. You would want to use this control to do that extra action, and that's the move control. So there's a position and then a move. That pretty much covers all these controls. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do is open up your script editor, edit, clear all if you remember, and then select each control of the whole mannequin. Leave out the move and the position control. Don't select those two rings underneath them. Just select everything except for those two controls. And then you know already, we've done this a couple times, just select all those mouse scripts and middle mouse drag them onto your shelf to create the button. Yeah, I already have one. Alright, so let's start blocking out our jump. So we're going to be going for something like this. And so we'll break that down a little bit. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start him off in a crouched pose, and then we're going to launch just like the ball bouncing on the spot. We did some of this with the avocado as well. We're going to have him go into a launch pose. He's going to launch himself up in the air. So the launch still has his feet on the ground. His toes should still be on the ground, because he hasn't actually launched off the ground yet. He's in the process of launching himself off the ground. And then we're going to ease into the top of the jump, and then ease out, and then back to something like the launch pose, back into a crouch. And we're just going to cycle that. And then we'll take a look at the graph editor and we'll offset the feet. You see in this area here, the feet are sort of offset. We'll do that in the graph editor when we refine it. Alright, so why don't we move our camera a little bit, just to give us a little bit of a better staging. So let's go to our window outliner, unfold our camera once, and let's grab the pause. And then we're just going to move this over a little bit. I just want to see a 3/4 of it. Just frame it something like this. Make sure you leave enough room at the top because he's going to jump. So that's pretty good for our camera. And we can bring our graph editor, we can squeeze that down a little bit so we can see what we're doing. We're just going to start with blocking this out, as we usually do. Block out the basic timing and posing. So let's get him into his first pose. I'm not going to leave a 10-frame hold. If we leave a 10-frame hold, then it won't be a cycle. So we do want to cycle this. So let's just bring him right down. Just grab his root control. And then it's always good to, you don't want to have the feet pointing straight forward. We don't generally stand that way, so angle them out a little bit. And then we want to move the knees out as well. What you don't want to have is the knee pointing directly at camera. So I want to talk a little bit about silhouettes. When posing a character with arms and legs, or any kind of a character, you want to keep taking into account the space that's around, in and around their legs and arms, or any other extremities. Everything that's not inside their body, that's outside their body, this space is called negative space, and the whole area inside their body is positive space. So we want to make sure that we don't have body parts touching like this. You don't want to have anything like this going on, like where it doesn't look like a very good pose. It's not an appealing pose. Also too, it's not clear to the audience what's happening. You want to keep things as clear and obvious as possible. Posing your character in a silhouetted pose is part of staging. Staging is done with the camera. That's why we moved the camera to a more 3/4 view, so it wasn't so straight on. It wouldn't be as obvious to see what we're looking at. It's more interesting at a 3/4 view, and it's a little more clear. So now we have him in our first pose. You can probably go a little lower. And I'm going to select the button that I created for the lower body of the mannequin, and we'll just key that. This is equivalent to the squash pose that we had for the squashing that we had for the ball bounce. When we squashed these objects, we had a moving hold. So we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to do a 3-frame hold. So let's go 3 frames down the timeline. It's a moving hold, so we're just going to move him a tiny bit. And if we move him down a little bit, we can bring his knees out a little bit as well. The feet should stay planted. Now that I have my next pose, I'll select my lower body button and we'll key that. Alright, so we're going to go right into our launch pose now. So we'll select the root control and bring it straight up. We'll just bring it to there for now, and let's go down to the feet. We can select them both at the same time and go to the roll channel in your channel box, and let's just roll his feet up a little bit. Let's just get him up to the point where the balls of his feet are still on the ground. So he's pushing himself up off the ground, and well, you know what we didn't do is go down the timeline to set our next pose. So we'll just do that quickly. So we're going to lose that 1, 2. So we'll just go 2 frames for this. This will be a rather quick movement. Okay, so 2 frames down the timeline. Now let's just bring that back up again. Bring the root up. You don't want to. This rig will break a little bit if you go up too high, so let's just keep a little bend in the knees. And we can bring these knee controls back into the center and just zero them out. So just a slight bend in the knees is fine. So you should have something like this. We'll hit our button and S on the keyboard. Okay, so we're going to do 3 poses for the top of the jump. Because we have legs now, we want to get a little more detail in our animation. So we're going to go 4 frames. Do 4 frames down the timeline. And we'll bring our character all the way up now. Just bring his root up first and then bring his feet up. You could select both feet and then shift select his root and just translate him up that way. Okay, so we're not going to bring him right to the top of his jump. He's going to go almost to the top of his jump. We're going to do the whole top of the jump here in 3 poses. Let's offset the legs as we're animating here. Let's get one up a little higher than the other. And let's take the roll off those feet. So just select both feet, go to the roll channel. In the text field, just type in 0. We'll drag the feet down a little bit. So the feet are going to drag. You can have one drag a little more than the other. You want to avoid twinning. Twinning is having both sides of the body exactly the same. So something like this. I mean, on occasion, there are times where you can get away with that, or where it looks acceptable. And there's even some times where you need it to be that way, but for a situation like this, in most situations, you just want to try to avoid twinning and just have the body, both sides of the body, a little bit different at least. And again, with the silhouettes, you want to avoid this kind of thing too. You wouldn't want these feet to be touching like that. It's just bad staging. You want things to be more clear for the audience. Alright, so I'm going to go with this pose. Alright, I'm going to go another 4 frames down the timeline. Let's select both of his feet and his root. And we'll bring him up to his highest. If you're going to move him that way, it's best to select the Translate Y in the channel box. Alright, so bring him up to his highest point, and we'll bring his legs up. So you want to avoid this situation again. There's no negative space here. We do want to make sure we have some negative space there. So we're just going to unclutter this area. Bring that knee out. Alright, let's key that. And then we'll start to bring it back down again. What we could do is copy this one to the other side of this highest pose. And I think I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to select my entire mannequin, copy this pose, bring it over 4 frames on the timeline and paste it. But we're going to change it a little bit. Let's just do the opposite of what we have here. So we'll bring this leg up a little bit higher. Okay, I'll go with that pose. Let me just see what I have here. Let's just scrub over all the animation that we've done so far. And let's see the speed on that, so we'll just play it. Okay, well that's fine for now. We're just blocking anyway. Alright, so we're going to go 2 more frames down the timeline, and let's actually copy our launch pose from before. And that can be our pose for when he's landing. Alright, very good. So that'll happen quickly. And we can actually complete our cycle now with our moving hold. And we can just use these ones that we used before. Alright, so we'll go to the second pose that we did. We'll copy that. And we'll just go 2 frames down the timeline and paste it. And then we can go to frame 1 and copy that over. And we can see we left it 1, 2, 3 on this side, so we'll do 3 on the other side as well. So I'm just going to drag my range slider out a little bit. Let's make sure we have our whole mannequin selected here. And I'm just going to spline all this stuff in the middle. Tangent, spline. Okay, so one thing we want to remember when we're animating somebody with feet is that you don't want to have the feet controls on spline unless they're in the air. At this point where he's in the air, the feet controls can be on spline, but as soon as the feet hit the ground, you see what happens if the tangents are set to spline. They shift around basically. They're going to float around on the floor and even go through the floor. And that's happening because, let's just look at the Translate Y on one of these feet. You can see that the Translate Y dips down here, and it's causing the foot to go through the ground. So we don't want any of that. So what we're going to do is just select both feet. It's a quick way to fix it. Highlight over the keys where the feet are touching the ground, and just go to tangents and set them to flat. And you'll see the result in the graph editor. Just flatten them out. And then when we scrub over it, you can see the feet stay planted without any moving around. And then we'll go to the other side. Feet going through the ground. We don't want that. Highlight those keys. Go to tangents and flatten. Alright, so let's look at what we did here. We're going up to frame 25. That's our last key. Our last key pose. And it's this exact same key pose as frame 1. So we don't want to have that hold for 2 frames when we're playing it. So let's set our range to 24. Watch the cycle. So right now we should be looking at timing. Where do we need to make things happen faster and where do we need to make things happen slower? So the top of the bounce can actually be a little bit slower. The speed at which he lands and takes off, I'm happy with. Expand our range a little bit, and there's some weirdness going on the landing as well. And that's because I have 2 moving holds, of course. So 2 frames for this. Okay, so from the launch pose to this pose, I gave it, there's 4 in-betweens here, but then on this side, it's only 2. So that's probably causing a problem. Alright, so we'll make this, let's make those 3. Make sure we have the whole thing selected. So from the launch to up in the air, it's 3. And then over here from up in the air to the, what's the same as the launch, it's 2. So we'll make that 3. So we'll drag that over. So these 3 poses need to be a little further apart. So we need to create more space in here. So we'll just grab this key and everything after it and separate it by, we'll just do 1 frame for now and take a look at it. So separate those 2. Let's just take a quick look. So that looks a little better. I think we can ease that a little more even. So we'll separate another frame for those, and that should be enough. That's a nice ease in and ease out. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is fix these feet here. They're breaking apart. You can do one at a time or select both. I'm just going to select both. Go into my graph editor, select the Translate Y for one of the feet, hold my control down, and select the other Translate Y. So now I can see the Translate Y curves for both feet. And we're just going to scrub over. We're already on the problem area here. After this pose, the feet can go straight up, and we have an ease here because the tangent's on flat. We're selecting both Translate Y keys on both feet. And we'll just break those tangents. Select one side and start bringing that curve up a little bit. If you select the camera panel, you can bend the curve and see the result. And that should be fine. So if we scrub over that, it looks good. So on the other side too, we'll have to do the same here. And that's fine right there. Okay, so what's our other issue? The major issue. Right, we had the hold going on, so let's just cycle this again. A little too bouncy at the bottom there. Let's select the root control. It's a problem with the Y. What we want here, because these are dipping down on both sides, it's causing a double dip. So we're going to bring that up. Let's just bring both of them up on both sides here. There, and that should fix it. And that's a lot smoother. So at this point we can even grab both these keys and bring them down if we want it to go down further. So now we're going to start refining in the graph editor. So let's just drag this graph editor back up a little bit. You can see. Alright, so I want to get some offset on the feet. So let's do some Translate Y offset on the feet. Select one of the feet. Go to the graph editor and the Translate Y. And you can start bending the curves and moving them around. I'm just going to bend this one. You can see the result up there. I just straightened that leg out a little bit. And what we could do is have that leg, by bending this curve here, you can see the leg goes down a little bit when I bend it. And then it's on the other side, it's going to raise up later. And we'll grab the other foot and do the opposite. Select the Translate Y and just bend this one the other way. So I want this to go up a little faster. This leg can move up a little faster. So by creating more of a bulge in this area on the Translate Y curve, the leg will rise a little faster. And since we bent it this way here, it's actually being bent down the other side. And that'll cause it to straighten out later. And we can have it a little more exaggerated here. And we can bend this a little more, just so that foot hits the ground a little earlier. We'll have this one hit the ground a little later. It's going to be offset, but they're going to hit the ground at the same time. So what you could do is, if you bring this key up, and then straighten that out a little bit, you could have the foot actually hit the ground later, which is nice. So I'll work with the Rotate X channel because we want to affect this channel here. So really all we need is some overlapping action, a little bit of drag. I mean, it already drags with the pose that we set, but we could exaggerate it a little bit. And if you want, right after the launch pose, right after it launches, we can break the tangent and really have it point toward the ground. Alright, so if we select the other foot, we'll shift select the other foot, and I'll select the rotate X on one and control select the rotate X on the other, and you can see that the curves are different. This is the one we just changed, and you can see that it starts to rotate earlier and then rotates the other way later. So when we scrub over it, we get. So that's a nice effect. Okay, so I'll let you guys refine that a little further. As always, select your camera and give it a play blast. If you select your character, just go to the last frame of your cycle and set your range slider to the frame before the last frame. So if your last frame is on 29, set your range slider to 28. And it should play smoothly like this. Alright, so definitely offset the feet and make sure your poses aren't twinning. Make sure you pay attention to the silhouette of your poses and that things aren't over top of each other or touching. And send me a play blast of that. So you can save this as a new file. And just go to File, Save As, and save as a new file if you want to keep the jump in a separate file. Alright, so let's move on to our walk cycle. Alright, so what I'm going to do is just grab his pause node, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees in Y, just so we see the side view. And we can turn our reference on. We have a walk reference here, and you'll have to turn textures on to see it, so press 6 on your keyboard. Just place it where it's handy. So a walk cycle has almost every animation principle in it. This is an example from the Preston Blair cartoon animation book. So it's a great exercise to do, and it takes a little while to get used to doing walk cycles. When you first start out, I recommend you always use a reference. Something like this to reference, and this is the first one that I used. It's great. It's a great example. So a walk cycle has a variety of poses. It starts off with the contact pose. The contact pose is where the heel meets the ground. And then the next pose is a squash pose, or recoil. It's when the body bobs down and catches itself. The next one is called lift, where they lift their body up. And then the next one is swing, where the leg starts to swing forward. And then we move into the next contact pose for the opposite foot. So let's just work our way through these. So I'm just going to set our first pose. What you want to avoid is the knees popping like this, or locking. So always have like just a little bit of a bend in the knee. And something like that is fine. Let's hit our mannequin button, and we'll just set our first key there on frame 1. We'll just go 3 frames apart for these because there's quite a few poses, so we'll go 3 frames apart. You can almost think of a walk cycle as controlled falling, where you're always moving forward. The torso is angled forward in the direction that the character is moving, and they're constantly catching themselves with their foot as they're falling forward. Okay, for the first pose, let's actually bring the root forward a little bit, and we'll give it a bit of a tilt as well. And we'll bring that foot forward a little bit, because the body should be angled forward a little. And I'll just reset that pose. So now that we've rotated the root, you can see the translations are pointing in the same direction that we rotated it in. You can just go to the channel box like we've done before, select the translate Y, and then use your virtual slider. And let's go to frame 3 and set the next one. So he's going to be walking on the spot, so we have to slide his foot back. So for this squash pose, you want to have the heel pretty much right underneath the pelvis. So bring it right back, and when you're bringing these feet back, you want to try to have them an equal distance apart for walking on the spot. Kind of key this pose. So the next one we're going to do, we're going to kind of sort of combine these two. It's a lift and swing. So he's lifting his body and swinging his left leg forward. So we're going to combine those two. And we can take him out of the roll completely at this point. And you can give his toe a little bend. So we'll key that position. So let's see what we have so far. We'll just scrub over our animation. So that's looking okay. It is important to get that foot, the right foot, the one that's contacting the ground, to be sliding back in a constant motion, but we can refine that later in the graph. Alright, so let's go 2 more frames and set the next pose. Okay, so we'll go right back into the next contact pose for the other foot. The translate Y should be 0 on that, and then we can just select the translate Z and move it forward. So on the contact pose, he's not in the highest. The highest part of his pose is when he's swinging his foot, and you can see it here in the reference. on the contact, he's starting to actually move down a little bit, so we can bring that pelvis down a bit, and that helps with the legs not locking. Alright, so let's just scrub over what we have so far. We have our contact, we have a recoil or squash pose, and then a lift swing, and then back into the contact pose again. So let's check the speed on that. So that's a little fast. Fix our timing later. Alright, so now let's go through and do the same thing for the opposite side of the body. So with 2 more frames down the timeline, and we'll go into our recoil pose. And what we can do is we can go to our other recoil pose and just copy the root control, the key that we set for the root control, so that it's the same height. Key that. I'm just going to compare it to my other squash pose. Probably bring this leg forward a little bit, and then we'll go into the lift swing, and I'm just going to copy the root from the previous one, because the pelvis would be the same height, and then we'll just adjust the legs. I'll key that pose. I'm just going to compare it to the previous one. Alright, and then we'll go back into our initial pose. So we can just copy that our first contact pose with the right leg contacting for our next position. So I'm going to select the entire character, go to frame 1, and we'll copy that, go 2 more frames down the timeline and paste it. And we should have a full cycle here. That's a very fast walk. Alright, so it's really quick, so I'm going to separate all these keys by 1 frame. Make sure the whole thing's selected. And just grab the second keyframe or second key pose. Just drag it out by a frame. And I'm just going to drag each one out by a frame just to slow it down a little. And then we'll check it again and see if we need to make any more timing adjustments. Okay, so our last key pose is on 19, so I'm going to bring our range slider to 18. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have so far. Okay, so there's a little weird jump in the pelvis there. We'll just take a look at that, see what's causing that. Okay, so it goes higher here on this contact pose than it does on this one. So we'll need that to be the same height so that it looks consistent, and we'll just have to bring these feet in a little bit, which is not a big deal. So we'll just translate those back in Z a little, and maybe tone down the rotation a little bit on the foot, and then we'll go to the other foot, the translate Z. Okay, so let's check that out now. So that's not looking too bad. So I'm just going to select the entire character, and let's see if we can slow down some of these poses. So when it goes into the contact pose, this could be a little slower. Just that kick forward. We'll grab those keyframes and just bring them out a little bit. We'll bring them out 1 frame. And we'll do the same thing on the other kick. And let's see how that looks. Okay, so there's one thing I'm noticing here with the foot roll. We're using it here on the contact pose. When we get to the squash pose, what we should do is just totally get rid of the roll, and then we'll have to just rotate and translate that foot back to where it's supposed to be. On the squash pose, let's just get rid of the foot rolls, and then we'll just translate and rotate the foot back to the same pose that it was in, and we'll key that. It was just causing a little bit of strangeness in the feet. So you can see on the right foot here, it starts to bend here. So we don't want that. So right after the contact pose, we go into the squash pose. We'll just lose all the roll, and we'll just bring it back to this spot. And we'll key that on that foot. And then when we scrub over that, it should be much better. Yeah, that's okay. Alright, so that's pretty much blocked in. So what we could do is a little bit of movement on the pelvis. So let's select our pelvis and go to the rotation tool. And we'll do some rotations on the rotate Z. So I'll just do this in the graph editor since I already have it keyed. So when we get down to the squash pose, he's putting all of his weight on his right foot. So it'd be great to have his pelvis sort of tilted this way. Whatever foot the weight is on, that pelvis can be tilted up a little bit. And at this point he's stretching so he can go down a little bit. Now the weight's on the other foot, so we can keep the pelvis tilted in that direction. And then on both these contact poses, we can just leave it at 0. Alright, so let's spline that. And we'll spline everything else. Spline the root. Just going to do it this way for now. Feet you got to be careful with. We don't really want to spline that. We don't want to spline the translate Y's when they're touching the ground because then they'll go through the floor. So let's just grab the right foot and let's take a look at the right foot. So when it's in the air, these controls can be splined. And then we'll do the left foot. So just the rotate Y. And we could also do the rotate Z. The rotate X, sorry. Okay, so some of the hip rotations cause the knees to buckle, so what we're just going to do is go in and adjust the translate Y, the height of the pelvis. So right in this area, I'll have to do all the heights here. What I could do is just bring the height down for the entire thing. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to each foot. So we should make these all linear. All the translate Z's for the feet really should be linear so that we don't get any sliding. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when the feet are touching the ground and they're sliding back like that, we want the translate Z's to be just a straight line in the graph editor. So just go through and make sure that the translate Z's for each foot while they're sliding back are in a straight line like this. So I'll let you guys go through and refine that even further. Now we're going to go ahead and translate his entire body across the stage just to get him walking through frame. So go to frame 1. Now we're going to use his pause node. So we'll just translate that next all the way off frame. Set a key. Let's give him about 3 seconds to get through frame. So we're going to go with approximately 75 frames and we'll see how that looks. We'll go there for now. We'll set another key at frame 75 and then we'll go to the rotate X because we need to translate him or move him across stage in the X dimension. Let's get our graph editor here. And we're going to want it to end up on the other side of the stage in X, so we'll just grab our last key here. Select your camera view so you can see what's happening. And we'll translate them all the way across stage in X. And we want that to be a linear movement. So no easing in, no easing out. So we can just select the entire thing, both keys, and hit our linear tangent so it's completely straight. And let's play that and see how it looks. Well, we haven't cycled him yet, but we can certainly see if his feet are sliding. So they are sliding a little bit. Alright, so what we can do is just cycle this now. So let's grab his entire lower body and go to the last frame and we'll just copy the entire thing. Copy and paste. So you can just Control C, Control V that. And let's make sure our cycle hooks up okay. Yeah, looks good. And we'll do that again. We can select the whole thing again and Control C, Control V. And it goes all the way past. Okay, so that's good. So now let's scrub through and see if our feet are sliding at all. If they are, we'll simply just have to adjust the translate X on the pause node. And maybe some of the translate Z's on the feet. Okay, so there is a little bit of sliding. Not that bad though, but we really don't want to have any sliding when we're doing a walk cycle. Okay, so what we can do is select the pause node. We'll go to the translate X. And let's go to the point where the feet are sliding. It's actually, you know what we're going to do, we're going to leave the pause node animation. I think what we can do is fix this in the feet. So let's focus on the right foot for now. We can see that it's sliding forward right in this area. So what we want to do is bring that foot back a little bit. So if we scrub over that, now it's staying more still. Just select that key that we fixed to stop the foot from sliding, and we can look up here in this text editor. It's minus 6.501. So we can just highlight all that and Control C to copy it, and then select all these other keys that we need the foot to be different on, and then go back to the text field, highlight that text, and just go Control V and enter, and you'll see all these keys update to the same as that. So that right foot shouldn't be sliding at all now. Okay, well, it's extremely minimal. I'll let you guys fudge with that a little more and fix it. For the left foot, it seems to be sliding back a little bit, or it certainly is sliding back. So let's just go to the middle here where we can see it best, and we'll go into our graph editor, focusing on the Z, translate Z. I'm also noticing that these start to decline. That shouldn't happen. So what we could do is, let's bring these up. We'll just delete all these keys in between. Right, so sometimes you have to sort of mess around with the feet and then mess around with the pause node as well. Let's adjust how fast it's moving. So because the foot's sliding back a little bit, we have to actually move the character forward a little bit. So if we do that just a little, so now that right foot's staying completely still. Move it up a little bit more. So now the right foot's pretty much locked. The right foot's sliding again, but I think if we adjust the translate Zs, it'll be totally fine. So it's moving forward, so we have to slide it back a little bit. This time let's just grab all of these. Alright, so we're going to get rid of all these keys in the middle. That may be causing us a problem. Yeah, so that's looking a lot better now. Okay, so I can notice the right leg's locking a little bit. So what we can do there is just go to the root and go to the translate Z so that we can move that back a little bit. And there we go. Alright, so here's our walk cycle. It needs a little bit of refinement. Get it as nice as you can, as nice and smooth as you can. And just send me the play blast as usual. If you want, you can hide the reference. And we'll see you in Body Mechanics 2.